Welcome back, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Strange Water podcast. If you have spent any time on crypto Twitter in the last few months, you know that we are deep into the ETH staking or LSD narrative. LSDFi, LSD-backed stablecoins, LSD indices, and that's before you get into the black hole that's drawing most of this conversation's energy. Which LSD is best? It's moments like these, when the narratives get louder than the underlying purpose, where I force myself to take a step back and ask the big questions. What is Ethereum staking, and why does it matter? Today, we are speaking with Jasper the Friendly Ghost, one of the most passionate and vocal believers in the world computer that I know. Jasper is a rocket pool maxi. He is a paid community advocate, an operator of the oDAO, which is Rocket Pool's back office system, a former treasurer, and a member of the Rocket Pool Incentive Management Committee. Suffice to say that there are very few people who have thought about Ethereum staking more than Jasper. And while Jasper is the guy to talk to regarding Rocket Pool, this conversation is about so much more than just one protocol. This conversation is about systems and economic design, the role of Ethereum in modern society, and perhaps most importantly, the individual motivations and passions that bring each one of us to the world computer. One more thing before we begin. Please do not take financial advice from this or any other podcast. Ethereum will change the world one day, but you can easily lose all of your money between now and then. And for further disclosure, I am a Rocket Pool node operator, and I'm invested in the RPL token. And, of course, my bags are heavy with ETH. All right, let's start the show. Jasper, thank you for joining me on the pod. I'm super excited to have you here.
Excited to be here. A long time coming.
Yeah, for sure. So I cannot wait to get into Ethereum. But before we get into like the beating heart that keeps us swimming towards in the same direction, can you please give the audience and myself just a little bit about like who you are, your background, and what brought you to the world computer?
Yeah. So, hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I love what you put out for the community. Great resources for everyone, especially breaking down some high-level concepts, which is ultimately one of the things that brought me here. So, who am I? I am Jasper the Friendly Ghost. I joined the crypto space back as a sort of consumer advocate. Sorry, no, purely consumer, and just in my econ high school class. Yeah. I was just fiddling away in the back of class, not really paying attention to lecture, and instead watching like Martin Kelly and all these random fintech Twitch streamers at the time who would just give like, in retrospect, really awful advice, especially given Martin Kelly then would go on to spend years in prison. But he turned me on to the notion of Bitcoin, and so that was in 2015. So there I was, bored in econ class. This shiny new thing, Bitcoin, had recently reclaimed $1,000. I remember that being big news to me at the time. But, I sort of like pushed it to the side until the bull market came around. And then I started digging in a little deeper and I discovered Ethereum. And so I was still like super passive at the time. This is 2017. I sort of bought on the way up. And then I went off to college. And in my undergrad experience, I was a philosophy major. I was studying pre-med. I was very far removed from the world of cryptocurrencies, but I still kept like an arm's length appreciation of the space. MakerDAO is really what kept my interest going in those sort of dark years. I remember when DAI first launched. I remember when they had their collateral crisis, the Black Swan events. And it's crazy. A lot of the crypto natives think back at March 2020 and remember how low the prices got. I remember looking at the prices and sort of like chuckling at how low Ethereum was, but the major concern on my mind at the time was that COVID was sending me home from school, which ends up being a really important point because suddenly I'm no longer at university. I have a lot more free time on my hands, and I'm still like this intellectually curious person driven by philosophy. And that's what I was doing at the time. At the end of COVID, I was finishing my philosophy thesis on Buddhism, totally unrelated. But thinking in these abstract ways about metaphysics made me kind of approach crypto in a different way. Um, Let me just back up for a second. So at the time I was doing my senior thesis in Buddhism, super left field, pretty unrelated. But I was thinking about things in really abstract ways, and had this reigniting of my passion for crypto, and I took it from a principles first perspective. I was doing philosophy in such a way, so I wanted to approach crypto in the same way. Uh, and so the ideals that drove my interest were decentralization, helping the actual people on the ground. And how could you do that? It ultimately came down to building the most robust, trustless world computer. And at that time, this is now like mid 2020, late 2020. Uh, Really, it was like the slow birth of the all L1s, but it was Ethereum. It was top dog. DeFi Summer was just like still in its like dying throes of grandeur. It was still wonderful. Uh, and Rocket Pool was exiting its first beta. So this is now getting into like 2021. So Rocket Pool really was the synthesis of a lot of the philosophical.
Well, hold on.
Yeah.
Before we get to Rocket Pool, just because, as you can see from your shirt, if you're watching on YouTube, like Rocket Pool is a major part of this story. But while we're still just treading water in your like journey to crypto, um, so I'm a really, really big believer that, especially if you're an American or a Westerner, and I'm not sure what you are, but for the sake of this conversation, I'll assume you are, um, that like in order to be a true like builder in crypto and a true believer, and not just like a financial speculator, like you need to see something wrong in the world that crypto fixes, and you need to be kind of betrayed by the system that we were all taught was fair in order to realize like we need solutions. And so it's interesting to me to hear that like Dai and Maker was like a big part of what you were interested in. And so I guess like when you think back like and you reflect on what was like that kind of burning ember deep inside of you that like made you know that there was something important going on here, what would you kind of attribute to what was going on in your life that brought you to that like due to crypto?
So I mentioned earlier how Buddhism was actually super left field. I take that back. It's actually a perfect metaphor. uh, there's this idea of metaphysics, like what is real, and what do you give authority to define what is real? That's a big problem. Like in our metaphysics, oftentimes in like the Christian world, you see God is the definer of reality, and God sort of has this authority. Well, in the current financial system, we have a similar question: the metaphysics of money. Who gives money value? In the American system, it is the United States. So what did Dai do? Dai broke the curve. Dai established for the first time a non-sovereign, non-national bound currency. So in this dichotomy or this status quo we had of money being a solely nation state derived apparatus, totally gone. Now what is money? Metaphysically, like in a more fundamental sense, we now have to think about, okay, what defines value, and what pushes that forward. So that really was a 0 to 1 moment in my head. And I think stablecoins in general recognize that. I mean, I think that was the first real winner crypto had. Besides, being drug money. Well, actually, drug money is the realization of a stable currency in a pseudo sense.
Yeah, I mean it's irresponsible to call Bitcoin stable during that time,
For
but
the purpose it serves in short-term transactions, it worked,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Stable
for
for its
sure. And
purpose.
yeah, for sure. And so earlier you made a comment about like how crypto can help people, and I think we're all here for some reason that can be described as that. But for you, when you see helping people, what does that mean? Is that like really about like providing people access to, like inflation resistant or non-inflationary money? Is it about like money transfers across like political boundaries? Is it about like access to like complex financial instruments? Is it all the above? Like, what is helping people mean to you?
For me, it comes down to access. Um, while I was in undergrad, I was on a debate team, and one of the most common thought puzzles problems we would like to do is how do you expand banking access worldwide, or how do you industrialize a growing economy? And one of the things we always came back to was enabling a credit system, enabling a safe banking system, and getting people out of purely holding cash and into a broader economy. This problem enables tremendous growth if you can solve it. And what we saw with internet and the rise of smartphones was an increase in the speed of penetration into the landmass. Like internet had a very slow trajectory compared to the rate of smartphone growth. Crypto currently is keeping pace with the latter, but what it brings is the potential of financialization beyond just connectivity. So that is going to be huge, and is current. Solana gets a lot of flack. The Solana phone gets a lot of flack, but people are underestimating the value that a successful phone that integrates a banking system can have on billions of people. I am Indian by nationality, and my family sends remittances cross border. There's fees associated with that. Crypto has, saved us money in that sense, but that's not a luxury everyone's familiar with. Uh, so helping people in this really real way of ground level, not corrupt financialization, going to be 0 to 1 moment. Another thing that, you know, Bankless has been getting a lot of flack recently. One of their best interviews was with the Ukrainian minister digital reform. It was shortly the middle of the Ukrainian war. Uh, what they discussed was how during the first week, 2 weeks of the war, the traditional banking system was essentially collapsed. It's very fragile, dependent on uh, each banking center having full access to electricity and so many other things. Whereas an Ethereum wallet works with just Wi-Fi. If you have a little bit of internet, you can do so much. And so they were underwriting a lot of their transactions with the donations that were sent in, and they were able to fill orders because of the Ethereum network, which was astounding.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I didn't catch that specific one about that specific episode on Bankless, but I've mentioned it many times in Discord or on this show. Like my fiance is Russian, and so I've been and like her family still lives in Russia, and so like I've been more aware of this war than most Americans. And like one of the things that we didn't experience, but saw happen firsthand last summerish was like the mobilization was like a lot crazier than any of us in the West understood, and like it got to the point where like my fiance she's in dental school going on to be an oral surgeon, and
Hey, teaser for later in the episode.
yeah, but like so her friends in Russia, like her male friends, like my age or younger, were like talking to her about like, okay, can we get to the US, like is that even possible? It's not. Like, okay, like how do you break an arm, like to like how do you break like I mean, and I just like when you're talking about war, like whether this is like us sitting in our history class, like pretending like we care, but we just care about the A, or like talking about a real war that's happening right now, like it just there's the people making the decisions, and then there's the people that are affected by it. And
Very, very different groups of people.
yeah, and I just like there's something so like crypto for its like most profound use cases, it's like it's ready. It's and I just speaking of Bankless, I think it was Vitalik was on Bankless at the end of last year, and he made this comment about how so he was in South America and he was super surprised that everyone there is using crypto, but like guess how they use crypto? They all just use their Binance wallets. And like they don't give a shit about like decentralization or being on chain or DeFi or whatever.
It
Like
just
they
works.
need it.
Yeah.
Yeah. They need to like be able to store value in a country where it's illegal to buy dollars, and they need to be able to transfer it to someone so that they can buy food. And I think that yeah, man, I'm rambling here, but I just think that like it is about helping people.
One more thing to add. Another common thing, and it's really unfortunate, it's highlighted the value of crypto is people who are fleeing now have a way to flee and retain their wealth. Like human migration in past has been devastating in a large part because people lose everything in the process and have to restart with nothing. But for the first time, you can on a little USB or even a piece of paper, you can carry vast sums of money across borders hidden, which when you're being politically persecuted, whether you're a war dissident or religious persecution, it's can change everything.
Yeah. I mean, that's about like, and I was just in Europe. I got back this weekend, and like when I was there, I went to Dachau and I went to Auschwitz and I went to Birkenau, and like part of like this is like our grandparents, like this wasn't that long ago, and like the it's one thing to say like, hey, like you can when you need to flee your country, you can bring all your assets and stuff, but like part of it is like, hey, you're gonna have the flexibility to flee your country when like things get really bad. And anyway, man, way too dark. uh,
It's already been a
so let's
fantastic interview.
yeah, let's move this forward. So it's 2020-ish, 2021, and right before we get to Rocket Pool being in what I guess like their first beta, or however they phrased it, but we like before Rocket Pool there is the beacon chain and like the birth of like ETH staking. And so as someone who was didn't join this industry until after that moment, can you just like share with the audience like kind of your reflection on those times and like what it felt like and like what proof of stake meant, like the promise of proof of stake meant then, and now a year or many years later, but now that it's implemented, like what is did we deliver? Like how does it feel now?
So I first learned about Ethereum 20 early 2017, and back then proof of stake was known as ETH 2.0, right? Uh, like this is going to be the next ETH. Uh, and there was, I remember it was like a recording of a Vitalik DevCon talk, and there was like 10 people in the crowd. It must have been like a 2016 lecture, and it's on the roadmap at the time. And Vitalik's a fucking genius because back then it is just so detailed, like every step of the way. And not only that, it accounted for like possibility of possible variations. Like sharding was always a potential. It was never a guarantee. Like obviously we thought of it as like this is going to happen, but back then it was just on the roadmap. So I was familiar with proof of stake. I was expecting it, like most people were, like 2018. Uh, so the bull market comes, prices start crashing, and I remember the good friend of mine who I told to convince to buy at the time. He was like, "What's going on?" I was like, "Don't worry, price is just noise. This is a multi-year plan. Proof of stake is coming. Sharding is coming." Uh, I was just off by like a magnitude of years. So like, what did that feel like, right? Uh, seeing, I wasn't technically adept enough to really understand the proof of stake change, like the switch. So my commentary on that would be bad. All I can say is I understood that the devs decided there was a better way to do it, and they were doing that instead, which I thought was like, you know what, fair enough.
And just to like hover on that point a little bit, like it Vitalik is a genius, and like I have really like strong reactions to hero worship and like cult of personality, and I mean I think that like Terra happened because we all like bought into go on, and so like I've built up antibodies to that, but like every part of my body wants to say like Vitalik, he's just some guy, he's not that good. But oh my god, like you go look back at like the 2013 things that he was talking about, and like
Prescient.
we're delivering on it
Yeah,
today.
yeah. I've been reading Proof of Stake. It was just a collection of his essays, and then like I'm just taking notes along the way. Like this predicted that, this predicted this. It's insane.
I know I haven't bought it yet because what he said was this was just a collection of essays from my blog, and I'm like, I mean, I've read them all.
I have too. I've read a good amount, but it produces a narrative.
Yeah, yeah, it's super like I whatever. I'm just being lazy, but like it's super. It's one thing to read the essays, but to see like which ones he chose, how he chose to lay them out, like that's part of the story as well.
Yeah, yeah. So getting back to Beacon Chain, right. So I was Mike mainly kept up with Ethereum news through the ETH Finance subreddit, home to many, home to many. Therein, I discovered Daily Gwei Bankless, and I remember that there was like trepidation and fear leading up to the Beacon Chain launch. Like, are we going to get enough ETH? Like, will people want to? It cracks me up now, but we were really worried. Like, were people going to want to stake ETH? Are the rewards going to be high enough? Because like at that time, we're coming out of the depths of the bear market. Like $90 ETH is still fresh in our memory, um, and morale was not great. Yet the Beacon Chain launches and it goes off without a hitch, like to my recollection, working fine, and that was a huge boost to the community. And then the stakes started flowing in, and every day people on the thread were like counting, they're just watching it, like, and updating also. Like the node operators were coming out in force, and so you saw ETH Finance like really start to like embrace its community, because people now needed to discuss their node operation setup. And then what happens is we see the return of some higher priced ETH, right? And that brings just a huge, like throwing gasoline on the fire. We hit the 700. Do you remember what the amount required to launch the chain was? It was like seven.
Yeah, like I just like all cards on the table. Like I found like listen, I was at school studying computer science in 2013. Like I read the Bitcoin white paper back then. Like I remember Mount Gox. I was worried about like wheat futures. Like I remember all of this stuff, but it wasn't until May 2021 when Hayden Adams was on a Bloomberg podcast and that was the first time I heard someone explain Ethereum, and I was like, "Oh my God!" So anyway.
So I had this very node operator centric introduction into Ethereum, like main, uh, and so that fear dissipated and turned into euphoria. It was really like this community come together. Like Bitcoins, they have their happenings. Ethereum has like DevCon, but it didn't really have a seminal moment to come together with until the Beacon Chain. And then there was also, and then it was like not much until EIP 1559. But yeah, I would say that was like the start of the Ethereum super cycle, in my opinion, the launch of the Beacon Chain in 2020.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I do think for a lot of reasons, which I don't know, maybe we'll talk about, maybe we won't, like staking is changes everything. And it changes everything from a like crypto economic security standpoint, from like a financial asset standpoint, from a I mean just from like a logic standpoint. Like literally Bitcoin is burning carbon for the sake, like the point is to waste the most. Like
It's interesting. The environmental aspect was not such a huge focal point early on. And there was a large amount of time between the launch of the Beacon Chain and the merge. I really think that time could have been cut down. Uh, if the environmental furor that sort of took over towards the second half of the wait to the merge happened earlier. I I want to say Vitalik commented on this at one point, or Danny Ryan commented on this. Uh, Ultimately, the merge was the hardest thing the Ethereum developers ever had to do, and the fact that it went off without a hitch was, are we worth all the wait? But at the end of the day, we're still left with this idea of like, how much extra CO2 do we have to add to the atmosphere? We were running like the equivalent of a small country.
I think that no matter what side of the debate you're on, like it's a distraction from Ethereum. And like, look, like you either believe in climate change or you don't. And if you don't, like, I have a doctor you need to talk to. But if
Yeah,
you like do, like, there's like things that are helping and things that are hurting, and like this like really helped, and it like helped like in a pretty significant way, but like it helped in like a way that is just irrelevant to the actual problem and is not really like why we did it. So I it's cool, but again, the only reason I brought it up was just like Ethereum should be proof of stake, and one tiny piece of that is like the environmental aspect. So anyway, a huge part of proof of stake is that staking decentralization changes, like the dynamics behind decentralization changes between proof of work and proof of stake. And so you know I think we can talk about a bunch of different things here, but just kind of like skip ahead to the interesting one. I'm not sure what happened first, Lido or Rocket Pool, but those are like kind of the two directions that at least like phase one of custodial staking kicked off with, right? And they were basically like polar opposites. And so, one, do you just like have any reflections about like what that time was like when these projects were kicking off? And two, do you think that what we see today with like the massive centralization and like the problems in the conversation, was that something that was like bubbling in the surface during Genesis, or is that only a reflection of how bad things have gotten?
Just to uh, correct you a little bit, Rocket Pool and Lido actually launched pretty differently. Uh, so
Oh, I just meant timeline
yeah,
wise.
yeah, they timeline wise, they launched Rocket Pool launched much later. Uh, some history, however, Rocket Pool was designed on the original staking contract, the Casper staking contract, and the token sale and ICO happened in 2017. Uh, this might hurt you if you are just now deciding to be a node operator, but the RPL price at ICO in ETH terms was like 0.0005. That was three zeros.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. I bought my Rocket Pool, my RPL like thing, my nugget in February of last year. So I think I paid $45.
But so the ICO happened very early, and it was a very fair launch. The DAO held no tokens. The team retained 10 to I believe 25% of tokens, and that was several years ago. What ended up happening was the Ethereum core devs decided to change how staking was going to work. Very shortly after Rocket Pool launched its first testnet. So, fun fact, Rocket Pool is the only contract developed for the original Ethereum staking contract. The bad thing about that is Rocket Pool wasted an entire 2 years essentially. Some of the architecture and framework and like theory was able to transfer over. However, Rocket Pool did have this ethos of making sure it was launching in a as decentralized manner as possible, and this meant enabling permissionless node operators. That was sort of this unnegotiable aspect of the protocol launching. However, when the beacon chain launched, Rocket Pool was not able to live up to that expectation. And there's an article that was released around this time by the CEO or the founder, David Rugendijk, that sort of explains their decision to wait and to release a more decentralized product. So there's a vacuum. There is no decentralized non-custodial staking
Or
product.
any custodial product.
Lido launches very fast. Uh, Very shortly after the beacon chain launches, you have peer-to-peer validator, Lido, the original Stakewise, Cream Finance, and a few small others. Coinbase, not immediately, I don't believe. So that
Yeah, I feel like Coinbase, yeah,
so that
much later.
that early scene was already being pretty dominated by Lido. Um, so they executed a pretty beautiful vision by releasing the Lido tokens to the developers of other major dApps. They pretty much established Steth into DeFi right from the get go. And that created an immense Lindy effect. This is also sort of the skinny merge at the time. Uh, Sorry, even before the merge.
So yeah, what's the skinny merge?
The skinny merge just meant that when the beacon chain and the Ethereum mainnet merged, withdrawals were not going to be
Hmm.
enabled. It was just the
Hmm.
consensus would now shift over to the beacon chain, and the beacon chain would actually be
Hmm.
useful. There was an interview on Bankless between um, the Lido founder, whose name is escaping me at the moment, a coin, yeah,
Lido.
Lido, uh, and Rocky Pool. And I remember at one point the Lido representative commented, "The beacon chain is like potato," which was a funny joke at the time because it was true. The beacon chain was just producing empty blocks, waiting for the merge.
Hmm. Hmm.
So we have this period of about a year where there is no not non-custodial product until Rocky Pool launches. And even
Hmm.
then, when Rocky Pool launches, it's in this very economically gated state. Uh, so whereas Lido can onboard any amount of ETH you can throw at it, with Justin Sun likes to test out himself with 200,000 ETH, Rocket Pool had limitations to enable a two-sided balanced market.
Yeah. So I do think that that is like worth picking apart a little bit, right? And I think um so in a second, why don't you describe like the mechanism by which this happened, the deposit pool, and like now how the brakes have been, if not taken off, just loosened a lot. And so because I think like what's really important to understand is like these systems that Rocket Pool put in place, like were specifically designed to slow things down, right? To not like allow people with ETH to deposit it into Rocket Pool until there was a node operator to match it. And like that is like very, very much in contrast to Lido and like other people who is Frax. Like we'll just like accept whatever you want. Like whatever you're willing to give, they'll take it. And so like one is just like more scalable and faster and like can grow a lot better, but like that has consequences. So we'll talk about the consequences in a second, but can you just describe what the mechanism is for Rocket Pool?
Sure. So Rocket Pool acknowledges that liquid staking is a two-sided market. You will always have a node operator and you will always have the liquid staking operator. Instead of trying to just ignore one half of the equation, like Lido, Frax, etc., do, and let the liquid staking grow unbounded, they had to grow in tandem. So at launch, um, you could launch a mini pool with 16 ETH, 1.6 ETH of RPL, uh, if there was ETH in the deposit pool. So at the time of launch, it was a gated launch in steps. At first, only I think like 500, then 1,500 ETH was allowed. It capped at 2,000. So at any given point, there could be 2,000 ETH waiting to match someone to launch a validator. So most of the time, there was a very slight premium. Our ETH would trade at like 0.1% above what it was supposed to trade at.
Because like normally, like if you wanted to mint RETH, you would just put it in the deposit pool, but the deposit pool was maxed out. So therefore the only way to get RETH was buy it.
Exactly. And so early on, uh, you could come in as a node operator if there was ETH in deposit pool. Majority of the time, it would be full. And so node operators, instead of having unbounded growth for the liquid staker, we had sort of unbounded growth for the node operator. And that sort of summarizes the Rocket Pool story. It is truly focused on maximizing the node operator experience as an extension of maximizing the Ethereum experience.
And what we've seen now, we'll rewind in a second, but what we've seen now post merge, where two things are happening. One, everyone has realized that like ETH staking has been de-risked from the existential side. I'd say. I guess I don't know. I mean, there's still risks. Don't get me wrong. There's still risks, but two is that Rocket Pool like took the brakes off of the deposit pool, and now
Yes,
20,000.
15,000. But there's this like asterisk there. So in this early system, that we were really just trying to get the product live in a workable fashion. There were optimizations to be had. Now we find that with the advent of 8 ETH mini pools, which is instead of having to post 16 ETH, we found that it is safe to do it with only 8 ETH. This has had a dramatic impact on the node operator supply. And we've found that we now have flipped it. We now have a surplus of node operators, and we can sort of be like, hey, we can accept a lot more ETH inflow for our liquid staking side. What the system allowed for is an additional queue, a rocket pool specific queue. So if you wanted to spin up a validator, you could put your ETH into this queue, and it sort of tacks on to the deposit pool. So if we had 1,000 validators in the queue, well, that means there's an additional 24,000 ETH that could be minted worth of our ETH. At its peak, the protocol could have handled a 97,000 ETH deposit. However, it's sort of like a supply demand balance now. The longer the queue gets, there's this funny interaction. Uh, RETH APR actually can grow higher than it's supposed to. This is a little technical here, uh, so I want to try to slow things down. The RETH supply, say, is at 100 RETH. Like there are 100 people each holding one RETH. Now we have a huge influx of people want to spin up validators, and the queue gets very long, like tens of thousands of people. Well, funny enough, we figured that it would be more efficient for those people in the line to start the validators earlier on in the line. So the earliest validators actually get to launch their validators by the later validators in the queue. So the first validator has their validators our ETH portion supplied by the second, third, fourth, fifth one. This allows the total amount of ETH staked for the RETH supply to grow over 100%.
Yeah, things like definitely get like more complex now because I think there's like a lot of interesting things happening, right? Like part of it, and like we're not going to go through all these things because like there's more things to talk about, but part of it is like changing to like the 8 ETH mini pools, right there. Part of it is increasing the deposit pool size, and part of it is this like new but very cool balancing mechanism that through like the technical way that you just described, essentially what's happening is the mechanism is pushing the returns of like pushing like kind of the excess returns of this system towards the side that needs more people. So whether if we have too many node operators and not enough ETH, then the node operators will be more incentivized by this mechanism. And if we have too many people depositing ETH, well, I don't know.
Both directions work actually. So it's actually the other direction is much more intuitive. It's called rocket arc. So if RETH is trading at a premium, if there's so much RETH demand, you as a node operator can capture some of that demand. What you do is you launch a validator, you mint RETH, and you burn it simultaneously, and you end up expanding the RETH supply and capturing a bit of the premium. Then this is all automated.
Yeah, another way, like, and I've done that before. It's great. There was a time when you could like earn like a whole extra ETH by doing this. And so like, yeah, man, we're getting like a little bit lost in like all the amazing features about Rocket Pool because where this conversation started is like on first principles, and as you said, and feel free to push back on this if you want, but like Rocket Pool is built for node operators to give them like the best experience possible because like the core thesis was like we need to decentralize the network and like the like financialization comes second. And I think what we're seeing with Frax and Lido is the complete opposite, right? Like the financialization is first, and then like we're going to figure out the decentralization second. And I just, this is a very open-ended question, so I'm sorry for that. But do you just have any thoughts on how easy it is to decentralize something after the fact? Like what Lido is going to need to do in order to be like a healthy participant versus the reverse, what Rocket Pool is doing, which is starting out decentralized and then working out how to like supercharge the system with financial mechanisms.
I think it is incredibly hard to go from a centralized and fully grown system to a decentralized system. I think what a lot of people get caught up in is centralization is great when you launch something new, often because you need to have safeguards in place. And it gets out of control when you stay centralized through the growth stages, because that makes the transition to decentralization much, much more difficult. So, to back up for just a second, in prior to the launch of Lido, there was a paper published by Paradigm, Georgios, and I think Hasu wrote it, and it was on staking pools bound Ethereum, and it was essentially predicting that it would be a power law majority following the first liquid DeFi accessible MEV friendly staking token. It was pretty much the blueprint for Lido, and I this article festered in the back of my head for years. I started working with Rocket Pool, and I ended up publishing a counter article to them. Why Paradigm was wrong, why RETH will flip Steve. Uh, and essentially, I point out that some of the warnings, some of the things they pointed in that original article, namely that a liquid staking token must gradually decentralize as it grows, uh, was lost. So that original article had these claims. One of the major one was that it should not grow over 33% without getting rid of governance. It was just right there in that original Paradigm paper. Yet here, last year, Lido governance votes against any form of self-limitation. It seems like the financialization, once you start with that in mind, it's very hard to lose that grip. So now that's just on a philosophical angle. It seems like the DAO has embraced financialization as a core principle, whereas the Rocket Pool DAO embraces decentralization and Ethereum as a core principle, and it votes as such. Um, in turn, you now have a very difficult proposition in front of you. How do you take a DAO committed to financialization for the most part and turn it into a decentralized actor? And not only that, you have to do it where you have 29 operators handling each about 1% of the entire Ethereum network.
Or one operator operating like 3% of the network.
Or, yeah, bad apples either way. And here is the ultimate challenge. What system can you enable that is not gameable to permissionally distribute that stake? It is a very, very hard question. Lido has been doing.
What would you say to the pushback? You're like, you're right. Can't distribute it. We're not going to distribute it. The way we do decentralization is that every incremental ETH that comes in the future goes to a new node operator.
So like the existing stake just stays there. New node operators get the.
Yeah, like tougher to visualize for Lido because there's not enough ETH left, right? But like for Frax, right? Like what if they just said like the way we decentralize is like the second we launch Frax V2, from here on out, like every new ETH can only go to a new node operator. Like, do you think that that's a viable like path to decentralization?
Not really. Well, it depends on when you do it. Like once you're holding 3% of the network in that original validator, that's you're already a risk to the network, right? No network. So the way the network decides who is too big is approximately 1%, because that's when correlated slashes get or correlated penalties come into play. Uh, and who bears the brunt of correlated penalties for liquid staking pool tokens? Not the node operators, retail, always retail. The risks are always just passed on to retail, while the benefits will continuously flow to the node operators. That is why they are content to take on as risky as a position as possible, uh, as long as people are willing to accept it. In my original response to the Paradigm article, essentially my case is that these risks cannot go ignored forever. That they rear their faces if you wait long enough, and you can either act preemptively or you can face the major slashing incident and then decide.
So actually, and they it did happen.
Lido did get slashed.
It actually did.
Yeah.
Right. So would you like share with the audience like the story of what happened actually as it happened, and then can you describe the correlation penalty, and can you retell that story but as if one validator that controls 3% of the network had made that mistake?
So the Lido node operator, RHMB or something like that, is at the cap for what they allow. It's actually over. It's like more ETH than they want in a validator, had gotten slashed. They were, I believe, switching. So for the people who are proficient node operators, you are going to be very disappointed in these professional node operators. So when you want to switch clients and you are a node operator, and there is a little bit of risk there because when you switch, your previous client might still be attesting to the network, and you don't want to have your new client also start attesting. Otherwise,
because that is
that
a
is a
slash.
slash. It's a double attestation. Your old client is attesting, your new client, bad, no jump, no good. The Rocket Pool network has a very simple thing called doppelganger protection, where it will check to see if your old client is still attesting in the network before allowing you to start your new client. Alternatively, you could just wait 15 minutes because that's the longest the old client could possibly still be attesting. Lido did neither of these things. They switched clients to a new client and they got slashed. Fortunately, this was localized to 20 validators. It was not a correlated slashing because it did not affect all of their validators, which was lucky. There are a few different ways. There's a few ways this could have gone very differently.
So before you get there, like let's say it was like 20 validators approximately. So that's approximately 650 ETH, right? And so what was how much what was the penalty? How much was
The
slashed?
penalty for that is just about 11 ETH. I think it's half ETH per validator.
All right. So keep that in mind, right? So because this happened to 20 validators, which is 650 ETH, that it cost 11 ETH, right? So, Jasper, like, what are the ways this could go really wrong? And when we say really wrong, how much does that cost?
I cannot give you perfect answers on the cost, but I can tell you where to find the perfect answers. And I can tell you the situations to get there as well. So I'm going to give two examples. The first one, this is the very simple one. Let's say all of the Lido validators got slashed. Say they're transitioning all their clients and they did this, whatever. It's clearly possible on a subset. It can be possible on the entire set. And again, we're only talking about one validator. Multiple validators can be affected. If they had slashed on all of their validators, at a starting point, that's half an ETH per validator. I believe it's 6,000 to 7,000 validators. So there alone, you're looking at 3,500 ETH. So that is the initial slash penalty. Now you have the leak that comes out. So while all these slash validators have to be exited, they're forced out of the network. It's one part of the penalties for slashing. In that period of time, you leak. You don't gain any rewards, and you lose value. Hopefully, you don't get a sync. Actually, no, you do not. Yeah, you just lose value. There is a second after a certain period of days pass. There's a checkpoint where the networks will look and see how many other validators in the network have been slashed. Because you alone were so large, over 1% of the network, that triggers a correlated slash. And I believe that adds like an additional few percent of your total capital as a cost.
Yeah, and again, like
it's at least double.
We should have prepared for this, but the point of this is like the more validators that were slashed concurrently, the bigger the penalty is. And the idea is that like, okay, if only a few validators were slashed in the last month, like that was probably a couple of node operators that like messed up and like no big deal.
It rounds down.
Yeah. But if like 10% of the network was slashed, like there's a very, very good chance that was an unsuccessful attack. And so we want to make sure that those people are severely punished. And so I don't remember what the numbers are, but like the scaling is like outrageous. It's like if like 5% of the network, right? So let's say Frax doubles and their one their one node that is running all of this gets slashed. That will destroy all of their ETH.
Yeah, a large chunk.
All of the ETH that is like it, and I don't know this off the top of my head, don't quote me on this, but it's something like 5% of the networking slashed at once will destroy all of the ETH.
You can find the exact details on ETH2 book. It was written by
Ben Edgington, who was my guest on the podcast that came out this week.
Beautiful. I love Ben. He puts out incredibly useful content. Really breaks this stuff down and gives you the exact formula to see how bad it is. I'm not sure if it was 5%. I think it was 33%. or 30. If you it was at 33% and they get all slash, then it's all the capital gets wiped out. I
Yeah.
don't know exactly. It's somewhere in that range though.
The point is it's not linear, right? And so it's like it's like if 1% of the network like results in like, a full ETH being removed, 2% does not result in two ETH being removed. It results in like six ETH being removed. And so, again, we need to do more research on things we talk about in detail. But um,
Notably,
the
what will guaranteed wipe everything out is if Geth has a fault. If Geth has a bug, the network is screwed. It currently sits at like 90% dominance. Within Lido, it's at 87% dominance. Rocket Pool, it's 50%, under 50%, just about, and currently dropping as we just started an initiative to further drop it.
Yeah, and so just to like flesh out what you're talking about, it's the for non-stakers, here's a crash course. It's like when you're staking, you're running two pieces of software, the consensus client and the execution client. Consensus and the like very cool thing that Ethereum and only Ethereum has done has made a priority to say we need to have multiple options for these clients. And the reason we do that is because if there's a bug in a client, we want, or a client is vulnerable to an attack, we want there to be like a bunch of different options, and we want different people to be running the different options. What we've really screwed up is on the
Yeah.
execution client, which is like it's exactly the same as Ethereum proof of work and is now just encapsulated in Ethereum proof
Mhm.
of stake. But 85% of the network uses the one thing, and the problem is if there's a bug in that one thing, um, let me put it this way: everybody with a liquid staking token is screwed. Most stakers are screwed, but the people running Nethermind are like
Yeah. Yeah.
the only people with
Yep.
left.
Yep. There are at least some Rocket Pool node operators out there who survive a good chunk.
Yeah, and PSA for Rocket Pool node operators. I am running Geth. I need to change, but the reason I haven't done it yet is because my brain is very smooth and I need to be certain. But like Rocket Pool has a service for us. It's called the Rescue Node, and like that's a resource for us to use to like continue testing and continue our duties while our node is offline, changing out of Geth, change out of Geth.
RPLClientDiversity.com. You can get yourself a POAP for changing.
Yeah, nice. Well, yeah, I'll do that. And it's even easier on the consensus side. So if you're on a Lighthouse or Prism, get off. All right, cool. Well, great conversation about staking, and man, like of all the people on this planet, like that like we could keep going on this for like days and days and days, but big believer in keeping it tight. And so with our last like section here, I would love to pivot the conversation kind of away from Rocket Pool and like pivot like directly towards Jasper. And so one of the things that like I think is like so cool is that like you are as much of a zealot as I am, and like you are a believer in the world computer, and like you can't keep your mind away from it, like even if you try. And yet you're taking like a major step away, like a major step away, and like that is like I am so excited and proud of you, and like amazing, man. Like you're going to medical school, and so one like I would just love to hear like tell me like when did you know you want to be a doctor, like how long has that been part of your journey, and like what does that mean to you, but to like how are you thinking about like this is the Hotel California, you can never leave, but like how are you thinking about like doing something so as intense and as time intensive as medical school, but still keeping your like umbilical cord to the world
Sure.
computer?
So I've been in love with medicine for the majority of my life, actually. I come from a medical family. I had relatives in the military as medics, and they had a huge impact on me early on as role models. For high school, I actually attended a vocational academy that focused on healthcare. So I had a huge amount of hands-on experience from a young age. Uh, and there's this feeling you get when you're doing something hands-on in the moment with someone, when you're being a physical caretaker, that is just not replicable in any other medium. Uh, Early on in my undergrad career at Princeton, when I was studying philosophy, Uh, I kind of wanted to study philosophy to figure out what the fuck I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I mean, why else do you study philosophy? Uh, and Peter Singer is a famous utilitarian who got corrupted in view if you followed SBF and effective altruism. But what Peter Singer presents is a fundamental question everyone should ask themselves. In that, is the ultimate good that you want to do a subjective one or a quantifiable one? And to understand the problem, he sort of gives this idea of you can save someone in the middle or in Africa by donating a mosquito net. Statistically, if you donate mosquito nets, you will save someone. I mean, malaria is a horrible disease. Mosquito nets save lives. Oh, and you can like sort of math out the dollar value. And so, say it's $1,000, quote unquote, to save a life. Uh, and then there's this other situation where you are just walking along and you see someone drowning and you're wearing $1,000 suit. Is there a difference between running into the water, saving that person, and spending $1,000 for mosquito nets in Africa? For me personally, there's a huge difference. Even if I can just like quantifiably say like, hey, I probably saved a life. Like, and if I did like $2 million in donation, I can be like, oh, I definitely saved at least some number of lives. But you're never getting that lived experience. You're never getting that connection. You're never going to know that this person with the X, Y, and Z characteristics is now in a better state because of X, Y, and Z that I was physically there for. Uh, and so understanding that ultimately pushed me further and further into clinical practice. And so even though I was writing all these like thought pieces, I was still at the end of the day still being a meditation counselor, pure mental health counselor in the background. Even when I was writing my crypto pieces for Rocket Pool, at the background I was studying in a post-bac program at a vaccine clinic and being a full-time caretaker to my sister actually. Uh, so medicine has always been the front of my physical activity. And so while I can like idly dream about like, imagine if decentralized finance was based on X, Y, and Z principles, that doesn't require my physical presence. And in a lot of ways, I feel like I'm only giving my true output to the world in when I can be there physically. So
Mhm.
yeah, that idea of this embodiment of action of service brought me to medicine.
Well, okay, this is like going to be too out there and just like too kitschy. Sorry, but do you see any intersection between crypto and medicine?
Yeah, but it's going to depress you.
Yeah.
uh, I come from America, and our healthcare system is horrible. Part of the reason I want to go
Mhm.
into it is to try to fix the disaster we have. Uh, and like ideally, so we run on an EMR, electronic medical record system, and is not centralized. It is the worst form of decentralization, privatized and corrupted, and centralized by
Mhm.
proxy. Uh, um, yeah, centralized by proxy. So you have like three different EMR systems that don't communicate with each other and are horrible, that fragment the system. And you have a similar situation with insurance. So I see where or blockchains can help in this standardization of data transfer and privacy protection at the same time. Like that's what we have. That's what national healthcare systems are good for, is a standardization of healthcare access. In America, we could, in theory, sort of maintain our privatization of healthcare if we adopted and get some of the benefits by adopting this ZK system for healthcare
Mhm.
information. The problem, of course, is that there is such a wall of bureaucracy in the way, and healthcare is inherently resistant to change. Uh, Crypto and healthcare sort of exist on opposite spectrums, where in crypto, you experiment first, think later. In healthcare, it's do no harm. You're preserving the welfare of the individual, and you experiment if you can. And like you want to push the boundaries of science, but ultimately you're trying to save the individual. You're not trying to be the hero. Um, and so I sort of lost myself in this analogy here.
No, no, but well, I mean, I think what you're saying is like obviously true, right? What a place for crypto and healthcare is in the medical records. And in one of my other podcasts, one of my guests said something which I loved, and like my game is always like, what's the most reductive way you can describe Ethereum?
Yeah.
And what he said was like, well, Ethereum is just like really an API that like allows all these different like games or whatever that we're going to build to like communicate with each other. And I'm like, man, I love it. I totally love it because like that really frames Ethereum as something more than like financial rails. And I do think that medical records, like once you understand ZK as the technology to enable it, is like that kind of solution.
You have a ZK Porter style rollup or an adamantium, you have like three verifiers. It doesn't matter if the verifiers are centralized. It's a one of n trust assumption. Like that's totally fine if you like if the U.S. government, the CDC, and the World Health Organization are the verifiers. It's very unlikely for one of them to go rogue, and even then, there's still like the out cases of you should be able to still do your own fraud checking of those proofs if you're a sophisticated actor.
Which is like a whole Pandora's box conversation of like we use open source like a shield, and it is like such a scam. No one can audit this stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, again, if I let this go, we go for hours and hours. So Jasper, man, it's just been such an honor, and I really appreciate it so much. So thank you for joining us on the pod. And before we send you off, you want to share where people can find you and anything you want to shout out?
Yeah, sure. So you can find me on Twitter at Jasper_ETH. I spend most of my time, however, in the trading channel of the Rocket Pool Discord, where I am a community advocate and I serve on the incentive management committee. So if you have DeFi strategies that you want to see Rocket Pool taking action with, let me know. That is my job in trying to connect Rocket Pool RETH to the greater DeFi ecosystem. This has been a great podcast. Thank you for having me. I've always respected your opinions on the space, and I think this conversation reflects the quality of the discussion you've put out in the space. So thank you again.
Man, you're being too kind. You actually like are in the trenches and like working on incentivization strategies, and I'm like a guy who like writes shit on Twitter for attention. So
I mean, the people that write shit get the people involved. We need the educators.
Yeah. All right, man. Jasper, it's been real. Thank you so much, man. I'll talk to you soon.